It was the start of a new school year at Fairview High, a suburban campus tucked into a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood where PTA meetings were well attended and appearances mattered. Mrs. Alder, a veteran English teacher with 22 years of experience and a reputation for being strict but fair, stood at the front of room 214, reciting the syllabus in her usual clipped, no-nonsense tone. She was precise, polished, and proud of her structure. Her classroom ran like clockwork and she liked it that way. As the students filtered in, the usual mix of nervous freshmen and sleepy seniors took their places. Among them was Jalen Thomas, a soft-spoken 16-year-old black student who had transferred from a nearby city school. He kept to himself, a spiral notebook tucked tightly under one arm. His locks framed his face, and his gaze stayed down as he found a seat near the back. Mrs. Alder's eyes flicked to him briefly, just long enough. Jalen noticed. It wasn't overt. It never was. But it started quickly. When Jalen answered a question thoughtfully about a Toni Morrison passage, Mrs. Alder responded flatly, "Well, that's one interpretation," and moved on. When a white student repeated the same point moments later, she nodded. "Exactly. Good observation, Madison." Jalen turned the pages of his notebook slowly, his jaw tight. Over the next week, the pattern held. Mrs. Alder corrected him more harshly, dismissed his contributions, and once accused him of plagiarism, until the principal quietly confirmed the essay was original. No apology came. Just silence and a colder tone the next day. At home, Jalen's mother urged him to keep pushing through. "You're going to face people like that," she said. "You still rise." But inside, Jalen was already writing, drafting something in that spiral notebook he carried everywhere. Something powerful. Something sharp. And soon he'd have a chance to read it where Mrs. Alder, and the entire school, could hear it. By the third week of September, the air at Fairview High was shifting. The leaves outside the classroom windows were turning amber and crimson, and a crisp breeze whispered that fall was near. With it came the school's most anticipated tradition, the annual Voices of Literature Showcase, a school-wide celebration where selected students performed original spoken word pieces or dramatic interpretations of literary works. In room 214, Mrs. Alder stood at the front of the class with her hands clasped, a faint smile on her lips. "This year," she announced, "we'll be doing things a little differently." The class quieted. "Instead of choosing a piece from a published author, you will be the authors," she continued. "Each of you will write a creative piece inspired by a theme we've discussed. Identity, justice, family, fear, truth. It can be a poem, an essay, a monologue. I want your voices, your perspective. The two strongest pieces will be chosen to represent this class at the showcase." A ripple of excitement moved through the room. Hands shot up with questions. Madison and Tyler, two students who always seemed to orbit Mrs. Alder's approval, were already whispering ideas about metaphor and meter. A few others nodded nervously, unsure of how personal they should be. Jalen sat at the back, quiet, his notebook open but untouched. Mrs. Alder's eyes scanned the room and landed on him. "And please," she added with a quick glance, "keep the content respectful and appropriate. We're still in a school setting." Jalen didn't flinch, but several students turned their heads toward him. Subtly but noticeably. The implication was clear. The warning, unspoken but understood, had been directed at him. That night, at home, Jalen sat on the edge of his bed, holding the same spiral notebook he brought to class every day. The edges were frayed now, the pages slightly curled. Inside were poems, rants, sketches, bits and pieces of himself he'd never been asked to share in a classroom like Mrs. Alder's. Until now. He flipped to a blank page and stared at it for a long time. Then the words came. They spilled out in ink, fast and raw and unfiltered. He wrote about being followed in stores, about being asked if he was in the right class, about teachers assuming he needed help without ever asking if he did, about how silence could hurt as much as words, and how respect was something he had to earn 3 times harder, just to be denied it anyway. It wasn't a poem or an essay. It was a mirror. And once it was done, he didn't revise a single line. The next morning, as Mrs. Alder walked down the aisles collecting printed copies, Jalen handed his in last. His hand brushed hers as he passed it over. She didn't look at him. She just nodded once, mechanical, and placed the paper beneath the others. That evening after dinner, she sat at her kitchen table with a red pen and a mug of lukewarm tea. The stack of papers was thick and she worked methodically, flipping pages, writing notes in the margins. Excellent imagery. Watch your tenses. Great use of metaphor. Then she came to Jalen's. It had no title, just his name at the top and a first line that stopped her breath cold. "You see me but you don't." She read it once. Then again, slower. Each line peeled something back. Her red pen hovered above the page, useless. The words weren't aggressive, but they struck with precision. They described a classroom where a student was invisible until they made a mistake. Where eye contact was avoided, praise was scarce, and bias lived between the lines, quiet but unmistakable. And though his piece never named her, she felt like it was written to her. For the first time in her career, Mrs. Alder wasn't sure if she deserved her own rubric of fairness. For the first time, her role in the classroom didn't feel neutral, it felt exposed. She put down the paper. Her tea had gone cold. Her hands trembled slightly. She had a decision to make. The days after the assignment deadline passed like a low simmer in room 214. The students were restless. The showcase was just over a week away, and anticipation buzzed in the background of every class. Conversations between lectures were filled with speculation. Who would Mrs. Alder choose to represent the class this year? Madison had already told 2 friends her piece was definitely getting in. Tyler said he felt pretty good about his odds. Both had crafted their submissions with Mrs. Alder's preferences in mind, technically sound, emotionally polished, and predictably comfortable. But Jalen? He hadn't said a word since handing in his untitled piece. Still, he could feel the tension every time Mrs. Alder passed by his desk. She didn't call on him anymore, not since the assignment. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward him during silent reading periods, and once he caught her watching him with something that almost looked like uncertainty or guilt. At home, Jalen kept rehearsing, not in the mirror, not out loud, but in his mind. The words played on a loop, as if his own story had taken root and refused to leave. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be chosen. But he knew if he wasn't, it wouldn't be because he lacked talent. That part was undeniable now. Friday morning arrived, gray and overcast. The clouds hung heavy over the school, and the wind outside rustled the classroom blinds. Mrs. Alder entered the room with a small stack of printed pages. She wore a charcoal blazer, her lips pressed tight. The class quieted as she took her place at the front, setting the papers down on her desk and taking a long pause before speaking. "I want to thank you all," she said, glancing around the room, "for trusting me, and this space, with your words. Some of your pieces were clever. Some were lyrical. But two of them shook me." No one moved. She picked up the first sheet. "The first student I've selected is Madison Reeves." Madison beamed, already rising a little in her seat. Light applause rippled through the room, but all eyes shifted to the second sheet in Mrs. Alder's hand. She hesitated. "The second student," she said, her voice a little lower, "is Jalen Thomas." You could have heard a pin drop. A couple students turned around, surprised. A few blinked in disbelief. Tyler actually said, "Wait, what?" under his breath. Jalen looked up slowly, not with arrogance but clarity. Mrs. Alder continued before anyone could respond. Jalen's piece was raw, compelling, and deeply honest. It's not the kind of thing we usually hear in this room, and maybe that's exactly why we need to hear it. It challenged me to look at my role in a way I hadn't before. That's the mark of a powerful writer. There it was. Not just a selection, but an acknowledgement. Jalen gave a single nod, eyes calm. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. But inside, a long, invisible weight began to loosen, just a bit. For once, someone like her saw someone like him for more than what she expected. Madison glanced at him, clearly surprised. There was no congratulatory smile, just tight lips and downcast eyes. Later that day, Jalen received an email from Mrs. Alder. It was short and carefully worded. "Jalen, thank you for your submission. I look forward to hearing your voice at the showcase. Your words left an impact I won't soon forget. Mrs. Alder." He didn't respond. Not out of defiance, but because her words weren't the ones he needed most. The real message was still inside him, waiting to be spoken on stage, once for everyone. And when that moment came, he wouldn't hold back. Not this time. The day of the Voices of Literature showcase arrived, bringing with it the electric mix of nerves, excitement, and something heavier, especially for Jalen. The school auditorium buzzed with chatter. Students filed in, dressed in semi-formal wear, whispering and giggling as they took their seats. Parents sat scattered throughout the audience, scanning the stage. Teachers clustered near the back, arms folded, smiling politely. Backstage, Jalen stood alone, clutching his notebook. Madison paced near the curtain, occasionally glancing at him with tight, rehearsed confidence. Mrs. Alder was seated in the front row of the audience, her expression unreadable. The principal gave a short welcome and the program began. One by one, students stepped up to the microphone. There were poems about first love, essays about family traditions, dramatic readings from favorite books. They were well received, some touching, some clever. Applause followed each one. Then Madison walked onto the stage, owning the spotlight. Her piece was poetic and well-structured, about how books had helped her escape the noise of the world. It earned loud applause. She smiled and bowed, then returned to her seat, passing Jalen backstage without a word. Finally, it was his turn. He walked onto the stage slowly, notebook in hand, wearing plain black sneakers and a navy sweater. The bright lights hit his face, but he didn't flinch. He could see the sea of students, teachers, and parents, silent, waiting. He looked down at his notebook, flipped it open, and took a breath. Then he began. You see me, but you don't. Not really. You see what you think I am. You see my skin and lower your expectations. The room fell into stillness. You correct my tone but not their volume. You question my ideas, but echo theirs. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You say you're fair. But fairness without reflection is just routine. And routine, when left unchecked, becomes a kind of quiet violence. Murmurs moved through the crowd. A few heads turned. Teachers shifted in their seats. Every time you asked for respect but didn't return it. Every time you overlooked my hand, or doubted my words, I noticed. I remember. Jalen's voice remained calm, each syllable weighted and deliberate. And maybe this stage is the only place you'll ever truly hear me. Maybe that's the only way I'll ever be allowed to speak, without being silenced by a smile, or a sigh, or a sideways glance. At the final line, he closed his notebook slowly. But I'm not invisible anymore. And I never was. He stepped back. Silence. Then a single clap. Then another. Then an eruption. The applause rolled through the auditorium, louder than any other performance that afternoon. Some students rose to their feet. A few parents followed. One teacher in the back wiped away a tear. But Mrs. Alder didn't clap. She sat frozen, eyes locked on the stage. Not angry. Not dismissive. But shaken. Because she had just been handed her own reflection, and it was not what she expected. Backstage, Jalen exhaled. The weight, the pressure, the years of being filtered through other people's expectations, it all lifted just for a moment. And in that moment he was seen. After the showcase, the crowd filtered out slowly, still murmuring about Jalen's performance. Whispers followed him as he walked through the hallway, admiring, confused, impressed, some even uncomfortable. But Jalen didn't seek validation. He didn't care for approval or praise. What he had shared on stage had never been about applause. It had been a release, a reckoning. Later that evening, while Jalen was packing up his backpack in the nearly empty classroom, he heard the door open behind him. Mrs. Alder stood there, her shoulders unusually tense, eyes softer than he had ever seen. Jalen, she said, her voice quiet, can I speak with you for a minute? He didn't turn around immediately. He zipped his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and finally faced her. She hesitated. Then, I read your piece several times. I listened today and I realized something. He waited. I thought I was being fair. I thought I treated everyone the same. But I wasn't seeing what was right in front of me. I see that now. You held up a mirror and it wasn't easy to look into. But I needed it. Silence stretched between them for a moment. I'm sorry, she added. Not just for what I missed, but for making you feel unseen in a space that was supposed to belong to everyone. Jalen looked at her, eyes steady. There was no anger in his voice, just truth. Being sorry isn't enough, he said. You have to do something with it. Mrs. Alder nodded slowly. I will. And for the first time, Jalen believed her. In the following weeks, something began to change in room 214. Mrs. Alder's curriculum started to reflect more diverse voices. James Baldwin, Claudia Rankin, Jason Reynolds. She called on Jalen more often, not to correct him, but to listen. She opened space for students to write about their real lives, not just what sounded good in academic circles. Other teachers too had attended the showcase. Word spread. Conversations followed. Jalen became a quiet force in the school. Not a loud protester. Not a model student. Just a young man who had demanded to be seen, and couldn't be ignored anymore. And though not everything changed overnight, the cracks in the old system had been made visible. One afternoon, as the semester neared its end, Jalen sat in room 214 after class, scribbling in his notebook. Mrs. Alder walked by and paused. Still writing? He looked up briefly, then nodded. This one's not for school, he said. Just for me. She smiled. Well, I hope I get to read it someday. He shrugged. Maybe. As she walked away, Jalen went back to his page, the pen gliding smoothly. Because now he wrote not to be heard, but because he had found his voice. If this story moved you, don't just scroll past, speak up. Bias in the classroom and beyond is real, and change starts with awareness. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced bias like this? Hit like if you believe every voice deserves to be heard. And subscribe for more powerful true stories that challenge injustice and shine a light on what too often stays in the dark. This isn't just a story, it's a conversation. And your voice matters.